Um, I hit the recording button. It's gonna get recorded. I did it right this time. Um, cool. Well, I'm seeing a bit of a quorum here, so I think we're probably gonna get started. So the past few days, we've talked about quite a variety of topics. We sort of started off our week talking a little bit about fetch and promises, which we ended last week on that too. Um, and then went through that more in depth yesterday, and then spent the latter half of yesterday's class kind of doing a rapid fire, going through a bunch of information about headers. So different headers you can include in requests and responses in HTTP requests you might make. So in reviewing sort of my material for that, I realized I had a few exercises I kind of blew through that I do really want to do because I think like they're good. And in particular, there's like one that I really want to do to start with, and we'll see sort of if other things would be helpful. But I want to do that one just so that like you all have an opportunity to use the authorization header to include that in a request to sort of like provide credentials to prove who you are with a token. That whole concept that I kind of brushed through quickly yesterday is an important one. And it's one that's going to come up with the New York Times assignment. So I just want to make sure everyone's familiar with it. At least you've done it once. You've sort of got like the mechanics down. And then after that, today's class is going to be, I think, a little more chill, hopefully. We're going to be talking about something that I think many of you already have somewhat of a familiarity with called JSON. Max might have brought up in the past. I know some of you have sort of been reading ahead or taking classes on your own, and it's come up sort of your own self-study as well. But we're going to talk about it officially. I'm going to sort of you've probably seen sort of my approach here, where I tend to sort of start with first principles and be like, why do these things exist? So we're going to sort of talk about like why JSON exists, why it's important, and how it makes sending data to and from API systems or to and from HTTP servers easy. Okay, that's kind of the plan. Let's get started. Okay. So this is the exercise I want to start with here. And this is something that we should be able to do, everyone should be able to do on their own, and we can do all within Postman. So there's no sort of fetch required. It's something we can do using tools I'd imagine at this point you all are at least somewhat familiar with. So there's two parts to this exercise. The first part is we need to generate a token. So going back to what I talked about yesterday, there's this idea of a token, this like random letter and number password sort of thing. And when you want to communicate with many types of servers out there, in order to make a request and for the server to process your request, you have to have permission to access the thing you're requesting. Like imagine you want to look at like information about your profile, like your user profile, or like you want to like view like a page in the application that like just any random person can't see. So one common way you might do that is with authorization header, but then also by specifying a token in that header. So I'd like everyone to make this request I've outlined on this slide. And what you should get in the response to this request, the response should be some text, which should say something like, okay, successful, I've generated you a token. And in the response, you should have some like a random letter and number string. And what I want you to do is after you get that string, copy it off your clipboard and keep it for later. We're going to need it in a second. So this request, the only purpose of it is to generate us a token. So go for it. I'm not going to walk you through it. We've done a lot of Postman. You should be pretty familiar with Postman at this point. So I'm going to just let you go for it. If you have questions, let me know. We'll walk through it together like in a few minutes though.
There's a period at the end of the token. Does that matter?
There is. Make sure you copy it without the period. You want
Okay.
just the random letter number, like the alphanumeric string. So once you've generated the token, take that string, copy it to your clipboard, or like save it in a file somewhere. We're going to need that for later. That's our token. That's how we're going to prove to the server who we are. Now, it's a little bit contrived because we're just like saying, hey, server, generate us a token. But in practice, like you would generate a token and be like going to a web tool and like clicking like create new token. And then the server would like give you a form you fill out and you're like create, and it would give you this token value. So somehow you got to get it. We're just going to get it by making a request because that's pretty straightforward and gives you a chance to use some of these tools a bit more as well. So cool. So let me, it seems like generally folks are able to make the request. So let me make it on my end here too, just so we can be synced up. So it's a post request and it is to http://careersincode.xyz/tokens on port 80 and then no body. I'm going to click send. I'm going to get this value here. So for me, my token starts with 67B and ends with 43E. Excuse me. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to copy to my clipboard. Oh, Elise, go for it.
Hey, it's Alize, but
Alize, sorry.
no, you're fine. I was just wondering, so I had did it again. Now, do I have to copy the second one?
Yeah. So if you run it multiple times, each time you're going to get back a different token. That's fine. You just need one of them. Either one should work.
Okay.
Cool. So I'm going to copy this. Now, I want to talk about something quick with tokens. I think I mentioned this yesterday, but you can think of a token like a password. If someone has a token you've generated, they like can kind of like impersonate you. They can like pretend to be you when they make requests. It's like the way you prove who you are with the request you're making. So like generally, you don't want to share tokens. Now, the caveat here is this is like a toy service I built. This isn't like a real example. These tokens won't really give you any like real permissions to do anything. But tomorrow, we're going to be using some real tokens for real services. And that's going to be different. Where like so those are things where like they're secrets. If you share them, people will be able to like do things on your behalf and it would be very bad. So I'm like cognizant here that I'm like screen sharing and you're all seeing this and this is being recorded. So like that's going through my head and I understand like this token doesn't do anything, so it's not that big of a deal. But like I'm just calling that out, that like think of this as like a secret and guard it in the same way you guard a password. So like don't paste one of these into Slack. Probably not a great idea. Okay. So I've got my token here. So let's do the second part. So now with this token, I want you to make a request to a get to /protected resource, still on career.xyz, that's all the same. And I want you to include an authorization header with a bearer token in it, like we talked about yesterday. So authorization, and then you've got your scheme and your value. Your scheme is bearer with an uppercase B, and your value is your token. So if you make a request with that, I'm going to give you a shot, give you a chance to give that a shot. It should work. You should get back like a 200.
Wait, it's uppercase B? Sorry.
Uppercase B, yeah. Typically, that's how the schemes work. They're uppercase, but yeah. So you should get back like a 200 or something that starts with 2, a status code that starts with 2. And that's successful. Like you were able to access that protected resource. If you oh, yeah, go ahead.
Are we doing this in Postman?
Yep, in Postman.
Thank you.
Yep. Sorry, I should have clarified that. So give it a shot. Try making the request with the header. If you give me like a thumbs up once you've done it, let me know. Or if you're having problems, we'll talk through it.
What was it supposed to say when we were done?
I forget the exact verbiage, but in particular, look at the status code. Just start with a 2. So it's like a 200 or like a 201 or something like that.
I got you specified a valid token. Thank you.
Yep, that sounds right.
All right,
But in particular, in Postman, look at the status right here. Just make sure also that starts with a 2. So you got like a 201 or a 200 or something like that. It sounds like you did, but like that's really where you
it's a
should look to
200.
confirm. Yeah, excellent. 200 is great. Cool. Okay. So sounds like folks have had some success. So let's go through it here. So this request is a get. I'm making get to / protected resource. Protected resource. Oh, hey, I've made this request before. How about that? Now, I'm going to include an authorization header. Now, something I should mention, there's a tab here, authorization in Postman. This looks very tempting. And even some of you might have gone in here and been like, maybe like bearer token and entered something like that. This might actually work. I'm not sure. But generally, I think at the point you're at now, it's probably easier if you just type the header out manually. This is like a way in Postman you can sort of like enter like these sort of as a way you can like support a bunch of different ways you can format that authorization header. It's like an interface to sort of make it easier than just having to type everything out. So there's a bunch, like we talked about basic in here. Yeah, basic auth, talked about that yesterday. Talked about bearer tokens yesterday. There's a lot of these different things. A lot of different ways you can format that header. And you can see some of these like have like lots of crazy fields and like OAuth probably, yeah. So you've got like, so like a lot of these, the reason why we talked about those two in particular is because those two are very easy. They're like the two most common, two easiest to wrap your head around. So I'm going to go over to headers here. I'm going to go authorization. And my value is going to go scheme, like the value. So scheme is bearer, and then the value is my token. So I'm just going to paste that. If I sent, it got back a 200, specified a valid token. Great. Now, if I were to try to access this resource or this endpoint without a token, like let's say I get rid of this header here, make a request, you're going to see it's not going to work. Get it back a 401. So this is what would happen if someone just visited this URL directly like in a web browser. They didn't specify any other information. They just tried to access it. It wouldn't let them. They have to have one of those token values to access it. Natasha.
Hi, Ryan. I wasn't here yesterday, so I'm a little like behind. I'm trying to find where you had the authorization box under headers because I don't have one.
Yeah, so if you go under headers here and you in one of the key values here, you start typing authorization, it'll autocomplete. But there's just sort of like 2 text inputs here, and that's just what I'm entering data into. And I would also say if you weren't here yesterday, we had quite the day yesterday. So you might want to think about setting up some one-on-one time.
I think I'm on with Doug tomorrow.
Oh, excellent. Okay, great.
Thanks.
Yep. Goggin, go for it.
Same thing. I wasn't here for 2 days.
Yeah.
Some issues going on with my family here. I just did it straight out of the authorization selection there, instead of going through headers. Like you see the seconds next to parms, right there. You do bear token, and then you I did that.
Yeah, and that works. So what that's actually doing behind the scenes is sort of populating the same field. So I think we talked about last week under this, there's this like hidden thing here. These are like auto-generated headers that Postman will automatically add to your request. So when you populate this here and you go over to here, it's like adding that in this thing, in this hidden section. It's like it's just like a different way to do it.
Okay.
The reason why, like, I would say probably at the point you're at now, it makes more sense to just type it all out is because like it's good to sort of wrap your head around exactly what's going on. And if you're having problems with your header, like having to go through like the extra layer of Postman to figure it out, I think is probably going to be more trouble than it's worth.
I didn't know. I didn't even know how to do it. I just did it because.
Yeah. I mean, do whatever works for you. That'd be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Yep. Cool. So that's kind of the demo. Oh, Natasha, I'm getting a 403 forbidden. So if you make a request to this protected resource endpoint, wait, a 403 forbidden when you're getting the token or when you're the protected resource endpoint?
The protected resource input.
Oh, you know what it might be? Or wait. You have like a bad token, is that a 403?
No.
I'm getting it back a 401, and I'm trying to remember what actually, how about this? Share your screen, let's take a look.
All right, let's do that.
So Kenny, your token was not found in the server's registry. That means your token's invalid. So if you're reading that and you want to like make sure you have a valid token, go through the first step again, generate yourself a brand new token and include that in your second request.
Oh my gosh, I don't even remember how to do that.
Oh yeah, okay. Oh, I see the issue. You got a period at the end of your token.
I swear to goodness, I just read in the chat that we were supposed to keep the period, so I did that. And I was like, okay.
I think someone said you're supposed to get rid of the period in chat.
Oh my God. Sorry. Thanks.
No problem.
I don't even know. I'm Ryan. I'm sorry. I'm lost.
Okay. So you have your token value that you generated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you want to make a GET request to careersandcode.xyz/protected resource. What you were doing before, like you had everything nearly there.
All I had to do was go back and edit and remove the period.
Yep.
And here I am reinventing the wheel. I don't, where am I? Sorry, gamer boyfriend in the background. I'm just gonna mute this and can we just move along? It's not going well. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. If you want to chat later, we can figure it out. I think it was I saw someone else had something. Kenny, you said you were still having trouble. You want to share your screen? Let's take a look.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see it or not. Can you see this?
Yep, I can see your screen. So it looks like that you don't have a authorization header in your request.
But I had one there, but even when I had it, it wasn't really working. I know you type it in like that, and then the value. Do you type in the actual token or the bearer token thing?
So you need to put the scheme and then the token. So there's sort of two words. The first word is the scheme in this case is bearer.
Oh.
And then the second word is your token. So you sort of, there's like a list of different schemes that this header supports. And bearer is one of them. Basic is one of them. We went through a number of them yesterday. But
yeah, I literally had that and didn't want to work. So when I send it, I don't know if I'm missing something because it's saying your token is not.
So the second word there, you have bearer space and the literal word token. You should paste your token there, the thing you got from the first request. Yeah, like that. And then uppercase the B in bearer.
And the dot.
And the dot. Yeah, in hindsight, that was a bad idea. There we go.
Thanks.
Yep. So importantly, like the concept that I'm trying to demonstrate here is that if you have a resource you only want certain people to access, the server can like require you to specify this header that sort of tell you like to identify yourself to the server to say who you are. And if you don't specify it or you specify a bad value, it'll give you back a 401 or a 43, or importantly, it starts with a 4. It means like you didn't specify the bad information. When you specify something correct, you can get back a 2, so a status code that starts with 2, like a 200 or 201 or something. And that means like, oh, things went well. Here's your data. Here's the data you have permission to access. So the whole idea of the authorization header is allow you to control who can view a certain, who can access data at a certain request, certain endpoint. Okay, that's really the demo I wanted to do based on what we talked about yesterday. The rest of the day, we're going to talk about something different. We're going to talk about JSON. And the way we're going to talk about JSON is we're going to sort of go through a bit of a problem you might have when you make a request. So I want to make a request to get/users. And in the response I get back from that endpoint, so what the server sends back to me, I want to send the client a list of users, a bunch of information about each of those users. Each user has a name, a type, so the type either being student or teacher, an address, a city, and a state. So there's a bunch of sort of metadata, and there's multiple users. It's not just one user. There's maybe like a list of like 5 users. So there's a lot of different ways you could go about doing this. And for those who are familiar with JSON, have sort of thought about this, gone through this exercise, or used it in other things, like we'll get to that in a second. That's sort of the final solution. But just like let's sort of think this like kind of more naively. Like you have just like plain text. You want to send data to someone in that plain text format. You want to like encode it somehow. One pretty straightforward way that is often done in like more low-tech sort of situations is like, what if you have like every user's data, you have like a user data and you've got like a letter or like a key, and that means like, oh, I'm done, time to move on to the next user. Maybe like you have a bunch of users data, then you've got like a semicolon, then all the rest of the next user's data and a semicolon. You've got like semicolons in between your users, something like maybe like that. And then, well, okay, yeah, we need a protocol. We need a way to structure this data. So the protocol I'm gonna like propose here, to at least we start with, is something where like you have every user separated by a semicolon, and then all the fields inside of the user, you maybe separate them with like a dash or something like that, some other character. So the idea is you have something like name dash type dash address dash city dash state semicolon, name dash type dash address dash city dash state semicolon. And it's the kind of thing where like you can read through that, you can kind of understand it, you can parse through it. And like, so here's maybe an example of what that would look like. So I've got like a student and a teacher here, all kind of encoded together. So I've got like name, type, address, city, state, so on and so forth. So this could work. And like, let's say I wanted to read this format, I wanted to understand it. I could write some code to do it. So we'll run this here so we can take a look at what happens. I'm just gonna paste this in over here. What you're gonna see is I'm like printing out all the details for each thing. So like name, type, address, city, state. And really what I'm doing here is I'm using this function split on a string, which if you're not familiar is like, if I've got like a string that's like hello world, and I call split on it and give it a character, it will turn it into an array where like the array is sort of like wherever that character is, it'll like split around that and give you sort of the sections of the string as items in the array. So it actually works really well for this sort of solution, because like you split on semicolon and then you get this and this, and then you split on dash and you get like each individual item. So, and like this sort of solution, it seems kind of maybe primitive, but it's like actually used in a lot of places. They might be using like slightly different characters, but this idea of like oh, we're just gonna like use a character to be like, oh, that's where sort of like thing one's done and thing two begins. That's done all over the place, especially sort of in like lower level systems. So this is not like too nuts as an idea, I don't think. So let's sort of like, so yeah, this works fine. This is like totally a way we could do it. But I want to sort of throw some wrenches in and sort of like see how this system might handle this approach to encoding our data might handle changes, like as we sort of our application evolves, if we have to do new things. So Dakota says, if something like this will be used in our New York Times project, it will, yes. But importantly, the thing we're going to use the New York Times project is what I'm going to get to in like 15 minutes. So we're talking about maybe some of the issues with this. We're going to talk about how we can solve that. And that thing we're going to talk about, JSON, is what we're going to use in the New York Times project. So we're getting there, but yes, we're going to use it in that project. Okay, so let's add some complexity. What if we need to add a field? Like we decide later on, we need to add the zip of the zip code of the address. Because like maybe to start with, we didn't have that because it wasn't that important. But then later we're like, oh crap, we need to like mail stuff to people or something. So we need to capture that bit of information. So we've now got that information. We're able to backfill it for all of our users. We need to send that from the server to the client in our response. So this actually kind of works pretty well. We can just sort of add another item at the end, like a dash, and then like our next thing. So I added our zip here to our user data, and then I also stuck it at the end before the semicolon and sort of like at the end of each user. So I think this kind of works. And if we update our unpacking code, we can add this little line at the end here and just like grab the next array index. So if I stick this over here and bring that back over here and run this. So again, really the only difference here being is like this is the only new line. And well, I guess then I added the data here, but like that's the only new line on like my unpacking code here. So if I hit enter, you'll see now I get all the things, but I also get zip in here as well. Cool. So it handled that pretty well. Let's try something else though. What if we need to remove a field? We decide this whole like idea of if someone's a student or a teacher isn't that important. We just want to get rid of that field altogether. So we want to do something like get rid of like that. Okay, cool, no problem. So in order to handle that, like we remove that section and then you just like update all your indices here. So instead of this being like, this is like this line's no longer important. And then this goes from instead of being like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's now just 0. And then you skip it. Now it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've got one less field. And this again still works. No real big problem with this. So name, address, city, state, zip, no type there any longer. Okay, so it handled that pretty well too. This is looking like actually a pretty good way to encode our data. Nice. But you're probably sensing a but. What if someone didn't update their unpacking code? So let me sort of explain what I mean by this. Let's say someone built a server and built a client, and their client had the unpacking code we had at the very beginning. So the original decoding logic. So it had like a type and no zip. But then the data the server was sending was the new data. The server's data had like the zip and no type. So like there's like different sets of fields we're looking at in that data. And what you're going to find is if like you run this, so this is the first decoding code I had, and this is the newest data format. If I run this, what you'll find is that things start to get a little weird. So name, got that right. Type, address, this is like they're all like offset. And it's because we did this thing where like we're sort of changing around our format. So one big problem with this way of encoding data is it's not very robust to changes. You, of course, can like make some changes and it's fine. But what it means is that you sort of have to be like very thoughtful about the changes you make to make sure you're not like breaking backwards compatibility with old logic. So like, you also might be wondering, why does this whole backwards compatibility thing matter? Like, well, because sometimes there's code out there that just like is consuming your API endpoint that you just can't really update. Like it's just out there and it is what it is. And it means that if you break that response, if you change how that response is formatted, like you're just going to break that thing and there's nothing really you can do. So you need a way, really, ideally, that you can format your response in a way where like you can change it. It's flexible, but it's not going to be formatted in such a way where you're going to like, even when you add those new things, you're going to break the old stuff. So it's like an interesting set of trade-offs there, but you kind of want both. You want to have your cake and eat it too. And this protocol doesn't let us do that. Okay, here's another problem. What if, so I'm a kind of a big Star Trek fan. What if we change our teacher from being me to good old Captain Picard, Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation? Okay. Anyone catch what the problem with this is? Any thoughts? So I've got a couple of folks that are pointing out the dash. And yeah, that's a really good point. Like, you're probably thinking also now, like, wait a second, you picked that dash kind of to be tricky here. Like that was something that you like picked for this edge case. And you're right, I kind of did. But I think the point still stands. Like, if you have a name that has a dash in it, or if any of these fields have a dash in it, then things get very weird. So what this is it's our decoding code with both the type and the zip field. That's just sort of where I went with this. But then I've got that name in here that with the dash. So if I run this, you'll see name, type, like now they're all offset again weirdly. So that's not good. And you'll also see that like this last one isn't even like a string. It's like not able to extract that out properly. So it's like, it's all kinds of messed up. It's not good. And you might be thinking like, okay, well, like maybe you could fix this. What if you use like a comma instead of a dash or some other character like that? And you're right, that would fix it for this scenario. But I would mention back to you that you're assuming that all those fields wouldn't have a comma. And maybe that's right. Maybe they won't have a comma. But trying to like enforce that to ensure that like when people enter their data, they're not going to have a comma because your protocol needs like doesn't support that or a dash or something like that. Like you're really pigeonholing yourself there, because what happens if someone comes along and they're like, I've got a comma in my name, and you really want to be able to represent their name correctly in your system? You can't. Like you just don't have a way. That's sort of like this what I'm pointing out here with Jean-Luc Picard. Like that is a case where that's going to be a problem. I also, so last week I went on a bit of a miniature rant talking about all the things with time, about how time is so difficult and how it's a thing that is really optimized, system optimized for humans and not computers. There's a very similar sort of argument that gets made very often about people's names. And a lot of people will, especially if you sort of grow up in like kind of more of a like Western context like I have, assume a lot of things about names just aren't correct. Like a great example, people will always have a first and a last name. Not true. People will always have a family name. Not true. People will always have like a name that has all like Western characters in it, like what's it called, like a Phoenician alphabet or whatever. Not true. Like there's all these sort of things that, I mean, are like assumptions that you might make. And this is one of those things where like if you assume no one's going to have a comma or a dash in their name, like that's another one of those assumptions that just is not going to be true at a certain scale. So I'll see if there's a great article, just like the time thing I mentioned or sent out yesterday, or not yesterday, last week. There's a great article. It's like 10 things you thought you knew about people's names that are not true, that sort of go through like this. And it, when I first read that sort of stuff, it was very eye-opening to me. But yeah, anyway, so this is all to say that this encoding mechanism, as we're starting to poke and prod it a bit more, it's showing some faults. And the reason why I'm going through this exercise is because everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people that I've like mentored in the past, especially if they're like younger, but like that's not always the case. Just in general, people like will often do this. They will just invent their own encoding mechanisms and do something kind of similar to this. It's fine. Like this is a great way to learn. It's a great way to like figure things out. But whenever I see this, I always poke holes in it, and almost always can successfully poke holes in it, because just if you're building your own encoding mechanism, you're thinking through like the happy paths. You're not thinking about what's going to go wrong when like we put weird data in, and it ends up being quite buggy. So this is all to say, this encoding mechanism is just not that good. It like works in certain cases, but it's just not that good, and we need something better. Something that has some of the same properties though. Like we need this way where we can like segment our data into sections. We need our way where we can like encode our data into like lists and like key value mappings and things like that. It's like it's not to say this was all bad, but there's just like some key parts about it that are bad. So I kind of already mentioned it, but the solution to this, what we're going to talk about in this class to solve this problem, is a protocol called JSON. I believe Max has already mentioned this to you folks once or twice, but like more like in passing. You haven't really gone deeply into it, but we're going to go deeply into it today. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's one potential way you can solve this problem. And I say one potential way because you can encode your data however you want. So far in this class, we've encoded our data in request and response bodies, just plain text English. And in the right scenario, like that totally works. Like especially if you're like communicating between people or your data is really simple and easy to understand. But like as you get more complicated, that kind of falls apart. But then also like there are lots of other solutions. The one that probably is more the old school one that you might come across is what's called XML. It's another approach to it, and that uses some other, it sort of has like its own sort of sphere of tools to deal with that. And there's some newer things, like in particular, Google has one that they're super big into now called protobufs. But like importantly, JSON isn't the only game in town. There's other things out there, but JSON is sort of the one where everyone knows it, and it's not really proprietary or tied to another system, and it's just become the most popular. That's why we're teaching it, because it's the one that you're most likely to encounter. But just know there are other encoding mechanisms out there. But what is JSON? So JSON is a method for encoding JavaScript data. It's sort of like a stripped down version of JavaScript. And I've got below here an example of what JSON might look like. And if you're looking at this and you're sort of familiar with JavaScript and how things kind of go, you're probably seeing some similarities. I mean, things like you've got like these curly braces, and there's like a key value sort of situation here, and JavaScript has those, and JavaScript are called objects. We've also got like this thing here, which has got the square brackets, and it's got some numbers inside, and this is just like in JavaScript, like an array. It's like a sort of a collection of numbers or collection of values. So in particular in JSON, there are three data types, three types of ways you can structure data: objects, arrays, and primitives. So objects in JSON are just like JavaScript objects in almost every way. So it's like a key value representation where you've got a string that's the key, and then the value is sort of whatever you want. And with an object, you've got this collection of key value pairs. Whenever you want to like reach into the object and get a value out of it, you do that by looking it up by its key. So if you have like a bunch of key value pairs, maybe like a key is like hi, and then a key, and then the value is like test, and you want to get that value test, the way you do that is you like access the object and you go like, give me the value at the key of hi, and it gives you back test. That's like the primary access pattern. That's primarily how you use it. And just like in JavaScript, in JSON, objects are not ordered. So like the keys and values inside are like unordered. The only way you can look them up is by their key. You can't be like, give me the first value. That doesn't really make sense in the context of an object. The other thing I want to point out about objects, this is different than JavaScript, by the way. This last part's different than JavaScript. In JavaScript, your keys don't have to be quoted. Something like this is totally valid JavaScript. In JSON, however, you have to put quotes around your key. Just to also let you know, like you can put quotes around your key in JavaScript as well. And in older versions of JavaScript, it was actually required. But in JSON, you have to always put quotes around your key. And if you don't, that's invalid JSON and like it won't process correctly. So I would say like, if you're familiar with JavaScript and have objects down pretty well, I would say like that rule around the quotes around the key, that's probably the thing that's most important you remember. And it'll trip you up. It trips everybody up. Everyone like it's like kind of annoying. It doesn't, you have to put quotes around your keys. So that's JSON objects. JSON arrays are pretty much in every way like JavaScript arrays, syntax-wise. So you've got square brackets. And inside your square brackets, you have a number of items. And those items are all sort of referred to by their index. So if you have this array here, and I want to get the item at the first index, or like the first position, I'll do like array bracket 0 bracket. So it being 0 index, it starts at 0. So 0 is the first spot, 1 is the second spot, so on and so forth. So, but like, it's the same kind of thing syntax-wise as JavaScript, where you've got your square braces, you've got all your values inside that are comma separated. And that's what how JSON is structured. Before I move on, any questions about arrays or objects? Okay. The last thing, so I mentioned there were 3 sort of like main bits of JSON. The last thing is what's called a primitive, or sometimes you'll hear it called a value. So JSON, I mentioned a subset of JavaScript. Not so like, of course, arrays and objects, like that's part of JavaScript, and those are kind of carried over. But there's a lot of like kind of primitive is like everything else that is in JSON that isn't an array or an object. And a primitive is either a string in double quotes, a number, true or false, or null. So I got that list right here if you want to like read through that one more time. But those are the only things that are primitives. So importantly, like single quoted strings aren't going to work. Backtick literals aren't going to work. Doing things like trying to have like a value that's like 1 + 2 is not going to work. You have like JSON is a data transmission format. It's not meant for like doing calculations or like things like that. It's meant for just transmitting raw data. So for that reason, you don't really ever like this limitation is not really a big deal in practice. And you rarely, if ever, have a need to store something that doesn't fit into this set of data. Because like what you're storing, if it's in JavaScript, like it largely just transfers over. Because like if you have your data, like those like operations like 1 + 2, when you like take your data and you're like doing something with it, those are going to like collapse, those are going to evaluate and give you the result. So you can't put like 1 + 2 in JSON, but you could put 3 in JSON and that would be fine. So here's a couple of examples of values that are perfectly fine. Like you have a double quoted string like this, a number. Importantly, like this is just an integer or like a floating point number. So you can have a decimal. It can be negative. Even some fancy things where you can like try to do exponents. So if you did like 1e6, I think that's a million or something like that. But that's kind of not that important. Null. So I imagine you're all familiar with null from JavaScript as well. So being like that value that represents nothing, like an empty value. But some values that won't work. So like if you try to add 2 strings together, that's not going to work. Other things not in this list, like for example, a regular expression, if you learned about those, that won't work. A single quoted strings, that won't work. So like importantly, just like these are your values. That's what you have to work with. And that's it. Oh, any questions? Okay. So part of the value of JSON is that you can nest JSON. This example here is kind of interesting because this isn't just like one level deep. It's not something like this. So this on its own, you've got an object. You've got a key hello that maps to the string world. So this is an object. This is a key of the object. This is a primitive, a string. This is another key of that object, and this is another primitive. But importantly, like you can have arrays and objects be inside of each other. And this is really where the power of JSON comes out, and like where you can start to represent things in like very interesting ways. So if you had something like this, like what's going on here is you've got this object. Key of hello maps to the primitive world. And then key of foo maps to an array. And then the array within it contains 1, 2, and 3. So you can nest arrays and objects as deep as you'd like. And you can have sort of whatever you want on the top. You can have like an object, then within it has like keys and values, maybe some of those values being more objects, with then like keys and values, maybe like there being an array inside, and that array maybe containing an object. Like you can get as crazy and abstract as you want here. And that's really where the power of JSON starts to shine, where you can structure, like it gives you a sort of, it's not like one defined format. That's like, you must structure your data in this way, where you have like text, a character, like that sort of thing. It's almost like a toolkit that gives you what you need to build a protocol that both sides can understand using some building blocks that make it so that you won't fall into some of the pitfalls that we had in our initial protocol. So, thought I had, oh yeah, okay. So I've got a challenge for you all. I'm going to put up that user data that we did before, that example on the screen. And we're going to together write it as JSON. We're sort of going to convert that example I had into JSON. So the question I have to ask you all now is, do you want me to do that VS Code live share thing again? Would that be helpful for this? Or do you all just sort of want to do it independently? Like we're going to do it together, but do you want to do it like on your own editor, or do you want to like look at my editor and like copy stuff out of it and all that?
Live share, please.
Okay. Cool. Okay. New. Okay, so I'm gonna go. Wait, I forgot how I did this yesterday. Wait, is this still live from yesterday? Did I never stop it? Oh, maybe that's what happened. Okay. Okay, so I think if I just like send you, sorry, for anyone who wasn't in here yesterday, I am like a complete noob with VS Code, especially with this live share stuff. So I'm sort of just figuring it out on the fly. I just posted a link in there. This is the same link that I had yet going yesterday. It doesn't look like I terminated it. Can everyone just join that again, or do I need this? Like, can you try to join and see if it works? If it does, great. If it doesn't, I'll like close it and put it back again. Okay, I'm not seeing any like pop-ups like I saw last time, so I might need to stop it and start it again, maybe. Okay, I think I pressed that. Yeah, okay. Excellent. Try that link. Excellent. I just do like a okay. Do like, yeah, here we go. Okay. So what I just did there is just change just this be syntax highlighted with JSON, just so it's a little easier to understand. So actually, I should call that out. Like JSON, you can, it's used in a lot of different places, and probably wherever you've encountered it so far has been more with JSON files. So there is a file extension .json that is typically where if you wanted to like take some JSON data and store it into a file, it's where you would how you would store that. So like I can also I can select JSON here and it'll syntax highlight it for me. There's like a use case around like needing to edit JSON in editors often. So there's sort of like some tools to make that kind of easy, which is good. Okay, let's get our users data up here. Try to find the, there we go. Okay. So here is our user data. Okay, and I'm just going to put the two users on different lines just so we can sort of like see it in an easier way. Make this text a little bigger too. Okay. So at the top level, with this data, we have a series of items. And then within it, we have a bunch of sort of like properties of each user. So there's many ways you could structure this data. Actually just gonna close that because I don't care about that file anymore. Okay, cool. There are quite a few ways you can structure this data. But in particular, this pattern of like, you have a bunch of identical sort of like things, concepts that you want to store together. Like you want to store like a list of identical concepts where each of those concepts have like the same properties. The way that usually gets handled in JSON is an array of objects. So if you think about it here, like you have an array at the very top. And that array contains a bunch of entries. So an array being like you can put a bunch of like items in that array that are all ordered by like an index or all referred to by an index. So like if each of those array items then itself was something like an object, that object could then have a bunch of keys and values, or maybe the key could be like name. The value could be like the teacher's name or the student's name. A key could be like type and then be like teacher or student, and so on and so forth. So that's like the most popular way it tends to be to format data like this. But you could do it other ways too. You could have like an array of arrays. You could try to do like an object of objects. So that might be a little bit harder. In general, like why an object at the top level here would be kind of tricky is there's no real like key. Like the key in this case, like it's just a list. So the key is kind of like where you are in the list. So that matters, it maps much better to something like an array than an object. So I'm going to start by making an array. So I'm going to make some square braces and open them up. So that's my array. And inside, I can put like a bunch of values. So like 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth like this. Okay, so we now have a JSON array that has 3 items in it. Cool. Let's, I'm going to make this 2 instead, just because we only have 2 items here. But let's take each of these and make an object in its place. So instead of having a number there, I'm going to put an object there. So either way, like I've got my JSON structure, I've got like my array, I've got inside of it items and in there, and it doesn't really matter like what kind of item I put in there. So this is like, I've got an array with two primitives in there, two numbers. Here now, I've got an array where I've got an object and then a number. Importantly, like those are not the same. That's totally fine. Like you can put whatever you want wherever you want. Like they can be like mix and matched. Like that's kind of the power of JSON, where like it gives you the flexibility to put whatever you need, like to structure your data however you'd like to structure it. If that means you have an array with an object and a number after it, then you can do that. In our case, though, we're going to have like a hetero or a homogeneous, excuse me, like array of objects, where every object's going to have the same key in it. And that's going to make a lot of stuff in the future easier. So within my first object here, so I just did an enter and it's going to indent it in. I'm going to put a key.
Why is mine not updating? It's still showing the fetch example. I don't know why.
Make sure you're on the tab I have open. I think I had the fetch example in like a separate tab and I closed it maybe. Are there like multiple tabs you can select at the top?
No, it's just only showing the fetch example. This link here.
Okay. Maybe try to quit and rejoin.
I did it like 2 times.
Okay.
That was me, anonymous thing.
Yeah,
Actually, like, man.
I don't know enough about how this works to be able to really advise you, which I hate to say, but okay, if this is happening for more than one person, maybe this is a bigger problem. Let me do this. Let me delete this. I'm going to terminate.
You know what? If it's not like a saved, if that was just like,
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, I see. Makes sense. So let me save it then. Okay, so I'll go like test.json. Sure, whatever. Okay. So I'm gonna put that back in there. Okay, now I'm gonna that. Sorry, I gotta make a new link here, I think. Okay. Try that.
That worked.
Excellent.
That worked.
Thank you for the tip. I learned something. Okay. So we've got our array of objects. I'm going to start adding some keys and values in here. So what I call these keys is not that important. It just need to be like something I can refer to later, something that I can be consistent with. So I'm going to do a key of, I'm going to go with name. So that's my key. And my value would be is like my name. Okay. So that's my key and my value. And I'm going to put my next one. So maybe like type. And then feature. So I'm just going to kind of transpose these in bit by bit here. So all I did here is I took every item, I just brought it down. And I gave each one a name. It kind of matched, think, up with what I had here. Yeah, name, type, address, city, state. Yeah, cool. Okay. Excellent. Let's do this for the second one. So we've got our first object populated. Get our second one populated. So I'm going to use the same keys and values. You don't have to do this. There's like no reason why, but it just makes your life easier. Because if each of these is identical, you can think of them sort of as like rows in a table, where each key is like a column in that table. So if you have all your things match up, it becomes a little bit easier to kind of like correlate things together. And we're going to see that in a second here. Okay, so this case. There's my name. Oops. Wait, what happened there? There we go. I saw someone briefly have their hand raised. Whoever you were, did you figure it out or?
Yeah, it was me. I just wanted to ask you, why are you typing in all of them in there like that? Like, since you already have them written on the top.
As
Or is it,
opposed to like copying and pasting them one by one?
yeah, I mean, so the line, whatever starts from the top line, the number one line.
Mhm.
So is it just there to just there to read, or what is it? Like, does that mean
Oh, it's just there for reference, so I can sort of show like, this is where we started, this is where we're going.
okay, perfect.
But as for why I wasn't copying and pasting all of them, it's because I can type faster than I can move my cursor sometimes.
So basically every time we write a JSON program or something, it has to be in the way you typed right now, like this.
Yeah, so anytime you write so I guess I should also say they call it a JSON document. So that's
Oh.
sort of what you refer to like the entire JSON thing as. So if you were writing yourself a JSON document, you would tend to like, I guess I should say like, this is not valid, like this is valid JSON now, like that thing at the top was just sort of for reference. So getting rid of that, like this here is a valid JSON document. So importantly, like we've got our array, we've got some objects inside, those objects have keys and values, and then our values are primitives. And that's sort of like, that is holistically like, that's JSON. I should also say that like, I just told you everything that there is in JSON. Like there's nothing else to learn. Like that is the entire protocol.
So
like, that's it.
how do you call this array? Like if you need to use this into your program, because it doesn't have a variable name or any kind of thing.
Yeah. So importantly, JSON is a data transmission format. It is not for running like logic. You can't make a loop in JSON. You can't like make a variable in JSON. But I think your question is like, how do you get this data into a place where you can do stuff with it, where you can like actually do interesting things? And we're going to talk about that in like 15 minutes.
Okay, that's what I was like. Okay,
yeah, sorry.
Data, but how are you going to use it, and how to like get it into your program? Because
yeah, I mean it's a really good question. It's like, why the heck are we learning this if we can't do anything with it? yeah. Yeah, so this is an example JSON document. In general, any questions after we went through this exercise? I would say that I think a great thing to be able to do at this point is if you could sort of like pull out like, okay, there's our array, here's our object, inside we've got our keys and values, and then another object here and our keys and values. So importantly, the length of this array is 2. We've got 2 items within it. Okay, cool. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to paste it into Slack. Just so we have
So I have one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
So JSON is basically JavaScript, like based on JavaScript, or is it a different language?
It is based on JavaScript. So remember how I told you what JSON stands for? JavaScript Object Notation. So it is a subset of JavaScript. So what that means also is like, this is actually valid JavaScript as well. Like this, like any JSON, you can actually like run as JavaScript. It might not do anything, but like it is valid, like it'll parse syntax wise correctly. Of course, there's a lot of extra stuff that is in JavaScript that makes it like work and so it does all the fun bits, but like the format is exactly what you're used to in JavaScript.
Okay, because you said the length part, I was like, oh, if we do dot length, it will say two because there's two objects in there.
Yeah, yeah. And Natasha said in chat, JSON feels like the middleman of any information JavaScript is sharing to the web. I think that's a great way to think about it. This is sort of like the way that you would, the protocol you'd use to like transfer information from two parties. I would also say maybe to add to that metaphor, like think about JavaScript, or sorry, think about JSON as like the language that is being used as that middleman. So it's like, it's a protocol. It's like a way you communicate. Okay. So I wanted to see if I could post this in Slack, just so we've got a copy of it kicking around. Now, this is where I let you all go loose and try something. Okay. So I would like you to, on your own, so take the code I have in the VS Code live share, maybe like make yourself a new tab or something and put it in there so you can edit it on your own system locally. I want you to, in both of these objects, add a key called age, all lowercase age, and make the value a number, some realistic age for both of these users.
I like that you said realistic because I was gonna do 1,000 something.
I mean, you can do that if you want.
Does that age has to be a number or a string?
A number.
Ryan, how old are you?
I am almost 25.
Wow. That's really exciting. It's always so cool when like people in tech are younger.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I've talked about this like last week, but it's one of those fields where you get a very interesting collection of people.
Like working at the grocery store.
You born in 96?
98.
98?
Yeah, I was born in 96. I'm about to be 27.
Shit, so fuck, I thought I was 25 too. Sorry, guys.
That's right. Rain, I forgot that you said you were 21.
I would say no. No, I'm sorry, I'm cracking up. No, I'm not. I'm playing.
Well, look, like you look 21. We're gonna stick with that.
Okay. So, has everyone gotten their age added in for both of these users? Anyone have any trouble? Or I mean, I realize like we haven't really given you a way you can like see if it worked, which I'm gonna show you in a second. We're getting there, but like just like typing it out. Like anyone like just immediately like I have no idea what I'm doing, I need some help. If you do, no problem. Let's take a look. But if not, then I'm going to show you how to check your work. Okay, I'm going to show you how to check your work. So there is a tool online, or more accurately, like a collection of tools called linters. This is something that Max has mentioned to you before? Okay. So he probably has brought up Prettier to you before, I would imagine. Does that ring a bell? Okay, seeing some head shaking. So Prettier is sort of like a linter, but Prettier sort of does more than that. So a linter is a tool that will look at your code and will like look for syntax problems and sort of point them out to you. You know how in VS Code, how you get those like little red underlines under things? That's kind of like a linter. And I mean, if I was fancy, I probably could tell you, oh, you could download XYZ extension that would give you a JSON linter in your VS Code editor. And there almost definitely exists one that you could do. But what I often do, when I have a JSON document and I'm not sure if I formatted it correctly, I will go to my trusty search engine and I will look up JSON lint, hit enter. My search engine is kind of fancy, where it even has one built in right to the thing. And then you just click any of them. Doesn't really matter what tool you use. This one, JSONlint.com, is one. What Mel pasted is also. Oh no, that's ESLint. That's different. But like, you just go to like any of these tools, and if you paste in your JSON, and you don't click support JSON lint for $2 a month, you click validate JSON. Because I nearly almost clicked that. It will tell you, oh, valid JSON, excellent. But let's say I do something like, I'm going to get rid of this value here. And I'm not, this button, they've placed it in just the right place where you almost click it every time. That's sneaky. Now it's going to tell me parse error on line 9. It's actually going to like try to do its best to like reformat my JSON to sort of fit its way it wants to do it. But like, because my JSON's not valid, it doesn't quite get it right. So, but it'll tell you like, oh, you got that wrong. So this is a tool you can use that, I will be honest, when I'm writing like complicated JSON, I use this pretty regularly. Like, I just use whatever like tool. I don't really have a favorite. I just kind of use whatever thing is there. But yeah, these tools are very helpful for sort of like troubleshooting your JSON. And also, hint, hint, there are JavaScript linkers online too. So you can stick your JavaScript in there and it'll try to like tell you like, oh, this syntax isn't right. For JSON though, it's especially nice because like JSON, like syntax is all there is. There isn't like logic in there. It's not like it doesn't have like embedded stuff inside in that kind of way where like there's sort of like another layer that can go wrong. So if your syntax is right, then it'll like, that's about all you have to do with JSON, which is good. So Kenny asked, wait, are we supposed to still put quotes around our values for age? Good question. So I mentioned, Palash asked if you want a number or a string. And this sort of depends like how you want to store your data. If you want to store your data as a string, like the text 20, then you could put quotes around it. If you want to store it as like a number, which probably is what makes the most sense. Like if you're storing an age, usually you think about that as like a number and not like the string 20. Then you'd put it without the quotes. So it's sort of like context dependent. In this situation though, Goggins sort of mentioning it, but like without the quotes probably makes most sense. Like it's a number of years, like you could increment it, you could decrement it. It's not like the character 2 and the character 0. Cool. Okay, so it sounds like in general, folks were able to get this to work. So let me sort of go through this exercise myself. So I'm going to go age 25, age. I'm going to go like 32. Okay. Take that, bring that over into here. And Gawkin, I know you're waiting. I just want to like really drive this home because we're about to put JavaScript in, or put JSON into JavaScript. And like, I want to make sure people have JSON down before we start mixing the two. We're getting there though. Okay. Validate. Excellent. Yeah, so that's how you do it. Now, one thing I want to point out here is the commas. You don't put like a comma at the end. You also need to make sure you have a comma between every value. So if it didn't work for you, that might be one thing to check to make sure you've got a comma after each thing. So like comma, 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 but then no comma at the last one. Cool. Okay, one more challenge here. I want you to.
Ryan, I just have a question. Sorry,
Yeah.
I missed. So with the numbers, we want to put quotes around the numbers.
So I would say in this case, probably not. Keep in mind that like it would be valid if you put quotes around it because it depends on how you want to store that data. Like, do you want to store it as the character string 2, 0, or do you want to store it as like the number 20? And in this case, because of age, people often think about in terms of like numbers. it makes more sense to store it as like a number. So I'd say that's probably what you want to do. So no quotes. And Kenny said, what about single quotes? And I brought this up in an earlier slide here. A string must be in double quotes. Single quotes will not work in JSON. Backtick quotes won't work in JSON. The only sort of quotes you can use, you can't use JSON. Or you can't use single quotes in JSON. That's not going to work. So only double quotes will work. Natasha says, I get an error without the quotes. Let's take a look. Oh, I think you might be muted, Natasha.
Sorry. Okay, so I copy and pasted that on here. And are you kidding me? I had red errors the whole entire time. Brian. Thanks
I
anyway.
don't know. Sorry, but glad it worked for you.
Right.
Okay. One last thing here before we get to what Gagan wants to talk about. So I want you to add one more thing to your JSON data. And that is I want you to, for each user, give them a list of favorite colors. So importantly, not one color, a list of colors. So maybe a way you could structure that, what I would probably suggest is like a key of maybe like list of colors, and then a value of an array that contains like a bunch of strings, like red, green, blue, something like that. So what makes this a bit trickier than the age example we just did is your value isn't a number or a string, it's an array that contains strings. So it's like we're getting into how that sort of nesting thing works. So give that a shot. And we'll go through it in a second. I also should say, once you have something you think that works, put it into that JSON tool and see what it says.
Wait, you said array, right? Like just make an array out of them.
Yeah, so what I would suggest is like an array of colors to be your value, array of strings.
That's what I did. I just wanted to make sure.
Cool. And also I should say, like, if you want to structure it a different way, you can do that. I'm just like, that's kind of the power of JSON. You get to pick how you want to do it. I'm just giving you what I would recommend.
Easy one.
I'll maybe show another option after we're done, just to maybe bring it up.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay. For my JSON literal, don't overcomplicate it. Just do the key, the colon, the brackets, the commas. Keep it simple, right?
Yeah, I think you got the right idea.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Something else I should mention real quick as well. So you've seen me indent my JSON. You don't actually have to do that. White space in JSON, just like in JavaScript, isn't important. So like if I did something like I like mush this all together, like all on one line or something, like that would parse the exact same way. It's just, of course, it's much harder to read. So you typically don't do that. Rain, go for it.
So I was doing a little research on arrays prior to this, you instructing us.
Yeah.
So the only time I'm going to do like my array equals the whatever I want my array to be is when I'm trying to convert it into JavaScript to parse it.
Yeah, so keep in mind right now we're in JSON, we're not in JavaScript. So things like variables, things like loops, functions, all that sort of stuff you're familiar with in JavaScript doesn't exist in this context. This is purely for just representing data. So it sounds like you're also kind of ready for what Goggin's ready for. Like, how do we use this in JavaScript? Please tell me. And we're getting there very soon, like 5 more minutes, I promise.
I apologize.
No problem at all. But like you're drawing the right conclusions, which is great. Okay. Let's go through this. Unless anyone wants me to take a few more seconds, but I think I'm just going to go through it here. Okay. So I'm going to make myself a key. I'm going to go like list of colors. Actually, I'm just going to do colors. Okay, so that's my key. And then my value is an array. And then my array might have like red, green, blue, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing for the second student down here. So I'm going to go maybe like colors, maybe like yellow, aquamarine. Get crazy. Okay, something like that. So that's my JSON. I'm going to stick that into my JSON lint tool here. It's valid. Excellent. So you saw me put these arrays all in line, like everything on one line. You could also do something like this as well. So like separate them. I mean, this is kind of like matching the pattern I did with the main array at the very top. You could do that. It's going to do the same thing. White space doesn't matter. For me, I tend to structure like these small arrays all in one line. It's just kind of the way I tend to do it. But like no real reason either way. Also, like you could make one of these empty. Like maybe this student doesn't have any favorite colors. That's totally fine too. So if I go over here and paste that, that's totally valid JSON as well. So just to maybe show another example there. And then one last thing I wanted to mention is, let's say you didn't want to structure it this way. You want to think of a different way to structure it. So this is probably like the most flexible way, and the way where like if you were to show this to like any developer, they'd be like, oh, that kind of makes sense. But there might be some reasons why you wouldn't want to do this. Like one that maybe comes to mind is like you don't want to have an arbitrary number of colors. Maybe you only want to allow people to pick 2 colors. So one way you could do is maybe you could do like color 1, red, color 2, blue, something kind of like that. And like maybe you could allow these to be like optional. So maybe like color 2 could be null for that student, something like that. So like that's another option. You're storing both colors, you're just storing it like differently. And the pro of this, the benefit of this is you're only storing 2, or I guess like if you made them nullable, like you can make null instead of the string there, you could be like 0, 1, or 2. But then the con is like it's not as flexible. Let's say you need to store more colors. You don't want to just add like color 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like that's just going to get really noisy and hard to understand. So again, like kind of up to you how you want to do it. But that's maybe to give you like an example of another way you could do it. There's that. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to paste this into Slack. So we got a copy of that. Okay. So now that's yeah, I have also this on the slide too. So we've got sort of an example here from what we did. But what we've all been waiting for, processing JSON and JavaScript. In other words, okay, great. Why is this all useful? So there are 2 functions built into the web browser that allow you to take a string that contains JSON inside and convert it into the JavaScript representation of that JSON. Okay, what do I mean by that? I think it'd be best to just show you an example. So right here, I've got this JavaScript. This is like JavaScript code, valid JavaScript. So I'm defining a variable here called text. And inside of that variable, I'm putting a string. And inside of these single quotes, I've got my JSON. So importantly, when you are taking JSON and doing stuff with it in JavaScript, you don't like the raw JSON itself. Like if you just like paste, I went like over to here, I copied this, and then I brought this over to like my JavaScript console and just like pasted this in. I remember I said that JavaScript is a superset of JSON. So like this is valid JavaScript. Like me pasting this in, I'm like getting all this stuff. Like this is working like I expect. Like this is importantly though, you're not really treating this as JSON in this context. You're just like putting some like arrays and objects in here, and DevTools is like, oh, this is just JavaScript. And I'm like understanding this thing as JavaScript. You're not really utilizing JSON in this context. If you wanted to use JSON, the way you would tend to structure this, instead of you having like just pasting this in here, you would make a variable, something like data. And then you would put your JSON in a string. So importantly, data isn't like an array. Data is a string, and that string contains all my JSON data. So think about, and this is kind of where we're going with this, think about data being what you got back in an HTTP response. So what you get back, that's a big text string. That's not like an object or an array or something. That's like a text string. So this is sort of that equivalent. And there are two functions built in to JavaScript. The first one we're going to talk about is for decoding. So if you've got this string and you want to convert this into the JavaScript representation into effectively this kind of thing, the way you take this string and you parse it as JSON, the way you take this data and like tell the browser, okay, go through this, go through, unpack it all, turn it into like the arrays and objects that I can actually navigate around in my web browser with like JavaScript, is with this function called json.parse. Oh, I need to make this bigger. What am I doing? So json.parse is a global function. It's built into every web browser. And I can pass this data. So importantly, the parameter you pass to json.parse, this is a string. And when I get out of it, what it returns is this format we sort of had before. This is like it actually being like parsed into JavaScript. So now you've got like your array of objects and you can kind of do whatever you want. You've got your colors in here, you can navigate around it. Great. So I'm actually going to stick this into a variable. I'm going to call this like parsed. So got our thing here. So this is like, you're kind of thinking through here, like what we do, like if you made a request to a server and you were to get back a body from your server, you could take that data in the body and you could put that into json.parse. And then coming out of that you then have like this rich object that may be like an array with objects in it or like something like that, that now you can like represent more complicated data with. And you can do whatever you want with that data once you've parsed it. So that's kind of where this fits into sort of the stack, fits into this request response lifecycle that we've talked about so far. So that's kind of where what json.parse does. Before I move forward, any questions on that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand this part. So if we do json.parse, like let's say that we're putting it in, so that goes in like our JavaScript part, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it will show up on like the browser or whatever we're like making or whatever, right?
So JSON, oh yeah, go ahead.
So I'm asking like, well, like we put the json.parse and then let's say that we're connecting it to our capstone. Would the names, like everything that we put in, show up on the web page or no?
So this is a step towards you being able to do that. Let me actually give you one more level up on this. So we have this parsed. This is an array. Let's say I wanted to do something with items in this JSON. Maybe I want to like print every user's name. So what I could do is I could like for user of parse, something like this. And we're now like, we're in JavaScript. We can kind of do whatever we want. And we could go like console.log, like user.name or something kind of like that. So what I'm doing here is parse an array. So user is going to be each of these objects from the array. And then each object has a key of name. And this is where having identical keys in the objects is really important. So if I do this, I'm going to get those two names. What if, though, instead of logging them out, I did something like I created an element on the page and I put the name of the student or the user into that element. Now I'm starting to do something, and this is where like that New York Times thing starts to come back into play, where, or Capstone comes into play, where you're making a request to a server, getting data that comes back, and you're then putting that data surgically onto your HTML page with things like documented element by ID. And what that lets you do is now start to make an application where you can actually show the user stuff on the page that came back from the server. Does that make sense? I'm going to assume yes, unless I hear no. Goggin, go for it.
So where did so like that's what I was asking you before. So where do we put the variable name, like data, right? Do we put that in the JSON or we put it in the JavaScript file?
In the JavaScript. So in this case, like data here, in hindsight, this maybe wasn't the best name, but like data here is a string that contains our JSON. JSON.parse will then take that string, convert it into the JavaScript representation, and store that into a variable called parsed. So this is where you'd have that variable assignment right here.
No, so
okay.
I guess I'm probably not putting this into the right words. So let's say we have this file right now, test.json. So is that gonna be the file separate, like for these things, or is it gonna be included into the file of scripts? That's why I was like, how can I catch that into there?
Okay, so the whole there's two places you tend to use JSON. One place is if you need to represent data in something like a file. That's maybe a great way to use JSON, where you have like a bunch of text in a file, you like put whatever things you want in there. And then now you've got this data in a structured format that you can do something like read that data from the file, process it, and then get out like your parsed JSON representation. So that's like one thing you could do. But then there's sort of another use case. And I think the other use case is probably what we're going to start to move towards for the rest of this class, which is you make a request to a server. And then the response to that server, the response text, like the body text of the response, is like text, it's a string. And that response text is JSON. That's sort of the way that the server decided to format that data. So you take the response data you got back from the server, and then you run that through JSON.parse. And now that text you got back, you have this rich object representation that now is like, oh, this is what the data the server sent me, and I can understand it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because that was like the whole confusion. Like I was like, where the hell are we gonna use this? Where are you gonna put this?
Yeah.
Like, you know?
Yeah, like I've got a file here because I want to like edit this and show you how it works. But in practice, your JSON is not going to be in a file when you're making a request. There's no situation where that will be like a thing. Also, I'll say that like if you missed the past few days, like we've talked about how to make requests in the web browser and gone, I would say somewhat deep into that. So that's like a bit of a prerequisite for this to really make sense.
Okay, yeah, I'll watch the videos. I just don't have time right now. I'm moving. So that's why it's like.
Yeah. Just I'm mentioning that just to like start to connect the dots a bit. So Natasha asked, so the parsed variable will call the JSON info because you already identified it. I think I'm trying to parse your language to make sure I understand what you're saying. I think you have the right idea. It's just you're using terms that I'm not familiar with, so I'm having to like read between the lines a bit.
I always struggle with the language in these classes for some strange reason. Like I know what I'm talking about, but I can't get words to make it make sense. But I was just asking about the parse variable already being identified in that like what is it, a parameter?
Yeah, so this
You
this
did a
variable,
thing, that thing
yeah,
right there. Uh-huh.
yeah,
So because you identified the data above as the JSON file, that's what I was trying to say. It's already identified, so when you call it, it'll bring that whole info set down.
yep, exactly. So like you can think of JSON.parse as like a transformation function. It's taking what you give it, and it's taking the same data, but just like reformatting it. It's turning it from like a string into like objects and arrays, and like importantly, I should be like JavaScript objects and JavaScript arrays and all that. Like,
It's a translator.
yeah. But it's like a one-way translator. So it's going to take that string and it's going to convert it into the JavaScript version. And this tees me up really nice for my next thing. So you also might want to go the other way. So what if you have a JavaScript representation and you want to convert it into a JSON string? Well, there's a corresponding function. So we've got JSON.parse, and the corresponding function is JSON.stringify. So parse will take a string and convert it into JavaScript. Stringify will take a JavaScript thing and convert it into a string. So you can sort of go back and forth. So let's give JSON.stringify a try, sort of show the other direction here. Goggin, go for it.
No, it was from before. I'm sorry.
Oh, yep, no problem. Okay, so I've actually just got this parsed variable. So this is a thing that like I generated when I ran JSON.parse. So I'm just going to run like JSON.stringify and then put parsed back into it. And we'll see as I get out. So this is like kind of all smushed together because I remember I said white space isn't important with JSON. So by default, JSON.stringify is just going to get rid of all your white space. It's going to like compact it all together. But we still have all the important parts. Like we've got our outer array here. We've got our curly brace. And then this is the other matching curly brace. So that's our first user right there. And then that is our second user right there. And then we've got our key and value and key and value. And then going in here, this is our colors key. And then we've got our inner array right there, or right there. There we go. And then our inner items there. So this is all represented. And in fact, if we take this, I copy this and I go back over to the JSON lint tool and I paste that in and click validate, it'll nicely format it for me. So what's cool is like, there's a lot of these tools that'll like format it and then like go the other way too and compress it. There's a question you might be wondering, which is like, why does it compress it? Like, what's the benefit to that? Well, if you think about sending a network request, like going all the way back to the beginning, we're talking about TCP, you're sending like bits and bytes over the wire. If you want to send a request, you're sending like a bunch of white space along with your body if you like have that. And that's just like extra characters that are kind of useless. Like for a computer, it doesn't need that white space. It's really for a human. So you'll find that most of the time when JSON is communicated over the wire from like a client to a server or a server to a client, all the white space will be stripped out. And it's because as a client, it's pretty easy to like reconstruct that if you need to, just like by following the indenting rules. And it's useless. Like it's extra bytes. It's just going to make your request take longer. So it tends to be like that you split it, you like cut it out. It just makes things a little bit faster. It's like a bit of like fat you can cut out of the request. So that's why. And I think I have an exercise on this later, but I'm just going to call it out now. There's actually some other arguments you can pass to JSON.stringify. And if you want to have JSON.stringify nicely format your thing, you can give it. So there's this, the second parameter is kind of weird. It's like, I've used it maybe like once or twice in my entire career. It's like a very unusual thing. But the final parameter is useful, and that's the number of spaces you want it to indent. So if I actually call it like this, with like parse null 2, I have to print it out for the indent to look right, but it'll actually format it with like 2 spaces. Or if I do like 4, it'll do 4 spaces. So you can actually have it indent it for you. It's just like you rarely need to do that. So yeah, but the important, Goggin, go for it.
One thing that I just something clicked in my head is that the parentheses, that the square brackets, and why did you put like only single quotes on there?
like single quotes around this.
Yeah.
So you don't have to put it in single quotes, but the reason why it's in single quotes here is because there's double quotes in the string. So if you put this in double quotes, you have to escape every set of double quotes within, which would be kind of sucky. That's why.
I thought we are not allowed to use single quotes.
Yeah, so this is important to bring up. So importantly, you're not allowed to use single quotes in JSON. So this is JSON right here. There's no single quotes inside. But this JSON data is inside of a string, inside of a JavaScript string.
Okay, I get it.
And that you can use whatever quotes you want because JavaScript. And it's just like, oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, if it's in a file of JSON file, right? That has to be in double quotes. Everything has to be in double quotes. But anytime it comes out of there, it can be in single quotes. So like if you want to put that into like a,
you can put JSON into a string, like a JavaScript string. But importantly, like JSON itself can't have single quotes. It's like just if you like, this is like equivalent to something like this. Like the only difference between these two strings is this string contains JSON. This string contains the word hello or the words hello world. Like what's actually going on there, those two values are otherwise identical. They're both strings. They both are surrounded in single quotes. They're both JavaScript strings. It's just this one happens to contain some data that if you look at it funny, you're like, oh, wait a second, that's JSON.
oh. So you mean anything in the curly braces cannot be in single quotes?
Yeah, or the square brackets. But yeah, that's
Oh, sorry, the square brackets.
yeah, and it's the reason why that is because that is JSON. Like that is like a bunch of characters that if you were to put into a JSON parsing function, it like interprets that as JSON. So actually kind of maybe an interesting exercise here to help drive that home even more is like if I had like made a variable here, I'm going to just like put this in here. So I've got like a variable here I'm calling JSON, and I've got a string, putting it in single quotes, and then within it I've got like this JSON data. I'm going to in here make this a single quote. So importantly, I can't do that because like that would in JavaScript be like that would be the string. So I have to escape it. I got to like put the backslash in front of it. So, but if I do that, and now I pass it to JSON.parse, it's not going to work. It's going to say that didn't work. That the single quote isn't right, and the error it gives you is kind of garbage. But like what it's really saying there is like the single quotes. That's the problem. So, but now if I go over here and I like have a single quote or a double quote again, and I run it. That's
so why can't we use double quotes outside then to make it easy?
You can. So I'm gonna make this JSON a little bit smaller just because like 1, 2, 3, maybe like that. So like let's move to that example for a second. So like if I parse that, I get that, cool. So I could put this in double quotes, but if I do that, like JavaScript's like, wait a second, this is a string and this is a string.
Oh,
So I would need to escape these quotes.
oh,
And
now
if I
I get it.
escape those quotes, it parses fine.
Okay, now I get it. Because then the next double quotes it will be like a string, and then next
Yeah.
double. Okay, I get it.
And this gets especially, okay, this is maybe, if this isn't a hit for folks, don't worry about it. But Gawkin, I think this is going to make you laugh, so I'm going to say it. If you have, let's say, JSON, where you've got like a bunch of data inside, and you have within your JSON a string that contains JSON, you have double escaping of everything. Does that do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, so
Like,
it's gonna be like a mess.
it blows up your head. Like you hate your life for that day. Yeah, it is like not a fun thing to deal with, but it definitely comes up. It is a yeah. So
Oh man.
anyway, yeah, so JSON.parse, JSON.stringify, those are sort of the primary ways you end up using dealing with JSON in JavaScript. Now let me show you a case where like JSON.stringify would come into play if you're making a request. Let's say I'm making a request with fetch, and I'm not actually going to run. I'm just going to sort of type it out to sort of give you an idea where this would fit in. But I'm doing something like careers in code.xyz. method, maybe like post, and then I want to specify a body, something like this. So, and I want to, let's say for this request, I want to specify JSON as my body. Like a JSON data, I want to encode it as a data that goes in the body of the request. What I could do is put here JSON.stringify. Oh, not actually run it. But I could be like, okay, well, maybe I want to go like hello world. Something kind of like that. So what this would do is this would take this JavaScript, encode it into JSON, turn it into a string. So like on its own, like this would be like that. And then it will put the string as the body of the request. So now you're sending JSON along to the server. So that's kind of the other side to it, where like you can parse the response that comes back, but you can also use stringify to go the other way and like write data to the server as like part of a post request.
So the whole point of JSON is to make things quicker, lighter, and organized, basically, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. And it's something where like it's a standard. So if you tell someone my endpoint returns JSON, they'll be like, oh, okay. If you say my endpoint returns this weird format with semicolons and dashes, they're going to be like, what are you doing? Okay. So we have a break we should be taking right now, and I will promise we're going to do that right after I finish this up. But there's one last thing I want to mention. And it's that we didn't talk about how JSON fixes some of the problems of our first example. Like where we talked about like the whole like adding fields, removing fields, like the name, like the Jean-Luc Picard, like the dashes thing. Like I want to sort of just quickly go through. I think I have, yeah, here we go. I want to go through like how that manifests. So if I have like this adding removing field issue, if I do something like add and remove fields, what's going to happen is if I try to access a key that doesn't exist in an object, this is why this representation of like array with objects is kind of nice. It's not going to give me something incorrect. It's going to give me this value undefined, which I think you've encountered before. This is sort of like a value in JavaScript that means like there's nothing at this key. Like this key is like there's no value there. There's no entry for that key value pair. And what's sort of nice about that is at least you're not getting something that's wrong. Like all your other fields are going to be correct. So this is a much easier failure mode to handle than our other format. Like in this sort of situation, we can be like, oh, we just don't have data there. And you can build a system with just assuming that like you can be very defensive. And like you can like always check and be like, okay, just to make sure, like, is there a string here? Okay, there is a string here. Okay, cool. Then I will log that out. And then you can sort of nicely handle this case of like, oh, their data doesn't exist. So if your clients are written well, this actually is like a very trivial thing to handle, which is excellent. It turns this problem that was a game-breaking sort of problem into a trivial one. So importantly, like the word they use for this is what's called it being untyped. Like there's no sort of like defined specification you have to follow. You can sort of like put keys and values wherever you want. Arrays, it can be inside of things. Like you can sort of structure it however you want. That's totally fine. Yeah, okay. Really trying to point that out there, Ryan. I think I've beat this dead horse quite a bit. Okay. Okay, that's what we're getting to later. I thought I had one more thing here on the other example. I guess I didn't. Okay, so the Jean-Luc Picard thing. Last thing I'm gonna cover before we go on break. So that example was a problem because we had our dashes before in our other format. So like, what's the equivalent in this? Well, the equivalent of this is like, what if we wanted to put a quote in our string? And I think from JavaScript, you probably all know how to handle that. So like if I have like a string where I want to be like, my string is like string with quotes. I want to put like quotes. I want to do something like this in my string where I've got like double quotes in it. I mean, I could put it in single quotes. That could work. Like that's kind of what I want to do. But if I have to use double quotes, then the only way I can like get those quotes in there is I have to escape them. It'd be like the / escape thing I think you're all familiar with, and like that totally works. And because JavaScript and JSON sort of share like a shared past lineage, like same sort of thing you can use in JSON. So if you have a string that you need to put quotes in, like maybe you've got a user's name that has quotes in it. I mean, it shouldn't happen. Maybe it could happen. You can do that.
Backticks
And
work.
backticks do not work in JSON. You only have double quotes. So that
Okay.
also means if you want to use a multi-line string, your only option is something like this. So I think Max has probably covered this, but like \n means new line. So that's sort of how you would handle it. Something else you'll see sometimes if you have a multi-line string, sometimes people will structure it as like an array of strings. That works too. And then like the code that's understanding it has to like parse that, be like, oh, it's an array, and then do something like join your array with like a new line to make that multi-line string. But this is normally what you see most of the time. Cool. So that's basically all I was going to get into with JSON. We have a bunch of examples we're going to do after the break. But yeah, JSON is going to be the format we're going to use by and large for now on, like the rest of queries in code for sending data back and forth in requests. So if you need to specify data in a body, it's almost definitely going to be in JSON. If you need to receive structured data from a server, it's almost definitely going to be in JSON. That's it. Okay. How about we go to like 7:50 for our break? How's that sound? Okay. See you at
Short,
7:50.
short me, man. Short me. You get like
Okay. You want to?
25 minutes. 25 minutes.
It's like 25 minutes. Yeah. Is that too short?
22 and a half.
Okay. Whatever.
No, I'm tipping with you.
I had an old okay. And I was muted. Hi everybody. I think we're ready to get started here again. Hopefully you had a good break. Remember someone had mentioned in the chat that they had a question for me. Trying to go back through and see if I can find who it was.
Yeah, that was me.
Oh yeah. What's your question?
It was just about, okay, so I found this really cool thing on like Google's website where they have a bunch of different APIs that I think you can use. Like, what is that?
Talking about that tomorrow.
Oh, okay, I'll wait. I can wait.
I mean, the quick 10-second version is an API is a way where you could have two systems communicate over sort of a transport you pick, and many APIs are HTTP based. So you can think of the systems that Google is providing as like very specialized request responses you can make that you can use to get information that's publicly available that Google might provide. And that's the quick version, but we're going to do a whole class on it tomorrow, talk about how you different ways you'd structure APIs, how you'd sort of format requests to them. And we're also going to make some requests to some real life APIs. So tomorrow we're actually going to make requests to like things that aren't the careers in code.xyz server, which is exciting. So we're getting there. But we're going to spend the rest of our day today doing a bunch of JSON exercises. So we did a bit earlier before the break, but I've just got some sort of like a more independent sort of thing. I just want to go through, get a chance for everyone to do it a bit on their own, try out JSON stringify, try out JSON parse, things like that. And then if we have some time at the end, I'll open up for further questions. So let me open here. So just back in the presentation again, I'm on slide 265. This is our first exercise. So you're gonna have to write some JavaScript for this exercise, and there's a couple different ways you can do it. Option one is if you're comfortable with sort of this DevTools environment, just like writing lines of code in here, you can do that. Another option is you can take the code we were working on yesterday, that example that we had for like fetch, or any sort of thing like that, where you can like make an HTML file, include a JavaScript file, and you can do your examples in there. Either way, you just need a place where you can sort of run your code and try things out. You also could probably do this one in Node too, if that's a thing you're into. But I'd say like either in developer tools or make yourself an HTML file with a script tag linked. So give it a shot. Start with just A. So we've got this JSON string here in this variable. I'd like you to convert that into a JavaScript object. Hey folks, how's it going? We're able to convert this into a JavaScript object. If you were, give me a thumbs up reaction just so I can gauge, see how everyone's doing here. It looks like maybe I'm going to give you folks some more time. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, folks, how's it going? Any thoughts?
There's a lot of characters we're working with here. So it took me quite a while just to make sure I even had all the semicolons and everything in place. And I skipped like one letter, so that threw everything off, but
I mean, you can copy and paste this in. You don't have to like copy all the JSON character by character.
I
would
did do
be-
that, actually.
Yeah, that would be a challenge. So I'm going to take this string here. Make a new, let's see. Oh, crap. Okay. Okay. I'm going to start with something like this. So I've got my, I took my JSON string, I just copied and pasted this line from the slide. I want to just log it out. Let's start there. Okay, cool. So if I want to take this JSON string and I want to convert it into a JavaScript object, I could do something like JavaScript object, and then I convert the JSON string into a JavaScript object. The function you want to use is, anyone?
Parse.
Parse, yes. So JSON.parse JSON string. Oh, and it would help if I logged out what I did too. JavaScript object. So JSON string, I'm going to parse that into my JavaScript object, and I'm going to log out my JavaScript object. So I get something that looks kind of like this. So, let me see. So I'll go. Hi. Make sense? Any thoughts? Any questions? Also, I think folks can see the live share thing. I think that's still active. It looks like it is. So hopefully that's still going. But if it isn't, let me know and I'll try to get that hooked up again. Okay. I'm going to take no answer as good. Okay. The second part of this exercise, B, manually add a new entry to the pop-up array inside the JSON string, specifying a new menu item for save that is the action key equal to save doc and the menu item for save. So the task here, take this JSON string and unpack it, sort of reach inside, take a look at how it's structured. You'll see like there's this menu key mapped to an object inside. It's got a key of ID, value of file, key of pop-up, value of an array, key of value string. My goal is I want you to add a new entry into this pop-up array. Now, this is like in the JSON. I want you to like go into the JSON, go in there, like add the proper keys, the text in there to add a new object in this pop-up array. And the object should have a key of value, or a key of a string value and the value of the string save. And a key of a string action and the value being save doc. So I outlined that in the exercise. You want something that looks so. Take that and put that over into. Here. Yeah, sure. Okay. So, and I want you to put that into the pop-up array inside. So you can do this however you want. You can take this JSON here, you need to manually modify it, but you can like put that into a linter and like let it try to format and make it easier to understand. You can just sort of go through here, try to update the thing in the right spot. But your goal is to modify this JSON to add this object into that pop-up array. Give that a shot. Let me know how it goes.
Ram, those are two different objects we're adding, right?
One object. So one object with a key of value. This is, in hindsight, this being key of value is nice and confusing. I didn't mean it to be so confusing, but like key of value, value of save, and then key of action, value of save doc. So like those all in one object together. So two key value pairs.
Okay.
So I manually added them, like. Can I show real quick?
Say that again?
Can I show you my screen real quick?
Yeah.
This is how you want it right here.
Yep, something like that. Make sure though when it parses, you still get the right format. So it looks like it parsed. Just like where it says object there, click on that and poke around. Make sure it's.
No, that I was trying to redo it over.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, perfect. I just I meant to say like I added over here like manually.
Yep. Totally
That's
what I was
cool.
looking for.
I copy paste here and then just added
Yep.
the thing.
Do a lot of that when you work with JSON. You've got like very similar things. There's a lot of duplication in JSON.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, folks, how's it going? Unless anyone wants any more time, I think I'm probably going to go through this example just so we can keep moving forward here. So I find that trying to like deal with JSON in this format kind of sucks. I don't really like doing it. I don't like it's all in one line. It's all smushed together. It's really hard to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just select it. And I'm going to just bring it over here into this thing. Because I don't want to like have to poke through it and like go character by character. When JSON's indented, it becomes like 100 times easier to understand, in my opinion. So what I asked was to add a key into the pop-ups array, or the pop-up array, excuse me. And I asked to create an object that has this information in it. So I can see here we've got this pop-up here with this array that comes after it. So I'm just going to take this final item here. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to paste it in. And I'm going to just, it was like key value save, and then save doc. So I'm going to go save doc. I'm going to copy this here. And you know what? It might be a little cheaty, but I'm going to do it. And I'm just going to put a multi-line backtick string here. Just put it right in. Because like JSON doesn't have to be like this single line thing. It's just like that's the way that it was provided to us for this exercise. But this is still valid JSON. So yeah, so we got that. And if I run this back over to here, I go, so I'm taking my JSON, I'm parsing it, and then I'm printing out the JavaScript object. I can like navigate in here. I see it now. I have 4 items in here. I've got our save and save doc. So that's probably the way I'd go about doing this. Now, there's another way you can do this, which is you've got this here. You can sort of come over here and be like, okay, pop up, open bracket. There's that brace. So that one goes with this one. That one goes with this one. And that one goes with this one. Okay, so I can take this. Oh, there we go. I can take that. I can copy that. And then I can go like paste. And I can update it, something kind of like this. So like this is another way you could do it. So what I did is I just copied the final item in that array, pasted it in, and updated it. That works too. So if I reload this, now we're still at 4. We got all of them in here. But to me, at least, I find this sort of action of like going in, modifying it manually to be a real pain in the butt and not something I really want to have to deal with if I can help it. Either method's fine. Like either will get you there. Both you have the same output. It's just like one's compressed, one's like minified, no spacing. One has it all in there. Either works. I'll tell you, when I do this stuff like at work, I use the first method because I don't want to poke around with like parentheses and brackets and all and curly braces and all that. Just kind of a bit of a waste of time, in my opinion. Okay. Cool. So that is exercise 2. Or sorry, exercise 1B, not 2. Now we're doing exercise 2. Exercise 2 is the other way around. Got this JavaScript object here. I want you to, oh, that's not what I meant. Copy, paste, there we go. Got this JavaScript object here. I want you to convert it into a JSON string. So you're gonna have to call some functions, and when you're done, just print it out. So do something here, and then console.log your result. I'll give you a few minutes to work on that.
Um, okay.
Okay, folks, how's it going? I think I'm ready to go through this one unless anyone else has wants a few more seconds here to finish it up. Okay. So for this example, we've got to take this JavaScript object and convert it to be a JSON string. So there's sort of two functions we talked about in JavaScript allow you to sort of convert between the two. JSON.parse and JSON.stringify. We already used JSON.parse. So you're probably thinking this is where JSON.stringify comes into play, and you'd be right. It's sort of the other direction. So JSON.stringify will take a JavaScript object or some sort of JavaScript representation, and then convert it into a string that contains JSON. If I were to do something like maybe like let JSON string equal to JSON.stringify JavaScript object, something kind of like that. After I've done something like that, I should be able to log out JSON string. If I go over here and I say that, and we take a look, see, I get a string. So it removes all the white space, it's sort of packed it all up together. But in effect, what we're seeing here, the same thing as what we're seeing here. So counts some numbers, start a string, end a string. Counts some numbers, start string, end string. Also importantly, this here, they're single quotes. Remember that JSON can't have single quotes, only double quotes. So it's actually replaced those with double quotes. Also, all of our keys, they're all quoted. So that's also how we kind of know this is JSON. So Kenny says, mine isn't doing that. Do you want to share your screen? Oh, okay, now it's working. Okay. Cool. So that's what we got for JSON.stringify. Okay. The next exercise we're going to do, I'm actually going to skip the next one. Just because due to time, I sort of want to keep us moving along here. Okay. The next one we're going to do is exercise 4. And this is where fetch comes back into the picture. So this one I think we're going to do together, just because I want to give you an opportunity to sort of see how fetch and JSON kind of interplay. And the next one is going to be, I think, really the challenge. And that one I want to give you a chance to try on your own. But that's where I think it's going to be a challenge. I think it's also going to really tie things together. So, but first this exercise. So we're going to make a GET request to queriesandscode.xyz/JSON. And this is an endpoint on the queriesandscode.xyz server that'll give us back JSON data. And our goal is to print out the data we receive back from the server, the JSON data. Okay. So I'm going to go back over into my code editor here. I'm going to start by, actually, before I do this, I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy this, I'm going to put this in Slack, just so we've got a reference to that. Okay. I'm going to start by kicking off my fetch request. So HTTP queriesandscode.xyz/JSON. So that's my URL. I'm kind of moving through this part fast because hopefully at this point, this kind of thing is making sense to you. You're starting to get the whole idea of a URL, path, the protocol, all that stuff. I'm going to specify method of get. This is just sort of being pedantic here. This isn't necessarily required because the get's a default, but just going to specify that to make things abundantly clear. And those are the only bits of information I've got to specify. All it's outlined in our prompt here. Okay. So remember, fetch returns this promise thing. This promise thing is sort of how we get the data out of the fetch. So I'm going to call the .then method on the promise. And this is going to, this callback function here, this function right here is going to get called when that value comes back from the server. When you get back that response from the server, it sort of goes into like that promise box. Once the value comes back, this callback function will be called here. And now your response data, you've got access to your response data. So I'm going to log that out, response. So this should look generally pretty familiar to what we did yesterday, where you've got the promise, you've got the then you attach to it, and you log out your response. So we're going to just start here, log this out, and we get back response. Cool. Okay. So, and importantly, if I refresh this, it's going to take a second for the response to come back because fetch is asynchronous. It's not going to happen instantly. Status of 200, that's good. So like we're headed in a good direction here, but importantly, we don't have our body text back yet. Now I didn't mention this, I think yesterday, I think we talked about this on last week, but importantly, the way you get the body text in Fetch is a little bit unusual. It's like it requires a bit more bookkeeping. And that's that when you need to decode your body text out of your response, that is also an asynchronous operation. So I've got my response data here, but actually in order to get the text of my body, I have to call response.text, a method on response called text. And this actually returns another promise, promise 2, I'm going to call it. Okay. So response.text is asynchronous. So when I call this, it's going to kick off parsing the body. You've got back the response, but the data in the response is still sort of like all packaged up. It's not really in a way you can understand it as like the person running the JavaScript. So we've got to call this text method. And what that'll do is it'll parse the JavaScript parse the body, like understand how it's formatted. And then once that's done, then promise 2 will get called. So the dot then on promise 2 will fire, the function you've attached will fire. And now you've got access to the body. So really what I did here, this overall pattern where I define a promise, attach a dot then, the same thing here. So then an async thing, assign it to a promise, attach the dot then, and this function will call. Okay. So if I save this and come back over here, you'll see my first log here is the response. My second log here is the JSON. Kenny said mine isn't doing that. Do you want to share your screen? Let's take a look. Oh, wait, again. Oh, wait, that was what you posted before. Oh my gosh. Never mind. Never mind. I'm getting confused. Okay. So I'm going to take what I have here and I'm going to paste this into Slack just so we've got a copy of it to reference again if we need to. Okay. But what we've done here is we've now got our response body. And you'll notice our response body is JSON. But it's a string. Like it's formatted as JSON, but it's like a string. Like it's not something where we can like access values inside of this JSON. So you're probably seeing where I'm going here. I'm going to take this and I'm going to pass it to json.parse. I'm going to log out parsed. So all I've done here is I've added these 2 lines. When I run this, you'll see, so I've got my response, and I've got my body. And then after I parse my body, I get the parsed version. So now this, I've got like key, hello, value, world, key, numbers, value, a bunch of these. And importantly, this JSON, like there's no literal string here. This came back from the server. This is sort of like the first example here where we're really starting to do like the full thing, where we've got like the server sending us back JSON, we're parsing that JSON, and we're actually able to like take a look at that JSON and like poke around and maybe like, let's say we want to like log out our list of numbers. You go like parsed dot numbers. So this is sort of like, we're just at this point, we're sort of back in JavaScript. We're like doing all that sort of stuff. So like we've got this object. I want to get the value that's at the key numbers. So I'm going to do this sort of thing. Printed out our numbers. So that is really the exercise that I wanted everyone to do. And I'd love if you could try this on your own and get this to work for yourself, because this sort of thing, like what we just walked through here, this is like kind of where we're headed. Like this is what we're going to be doing the rest of the day, but then also tomorrow. And what you're going to be doing for like the rest of careers in code in some way or another, you're going to be sending JSON from one thing to another thing. You're going to be serializing and parsing it on both ends. So any questions on this? Cool. I'm seeing subdued excitement from folks in the chat, which is good. Definitely good. I will take the final version of this and I'll put it into Slack just so you got a copy of it here. Where am I? There I am. Okay. Cool. Okay. This is oh, Kenny, you asked, are these going to the HackUpstate GitHub repo as well? I can put them in there, yeah. I haven't been doing a very good job with that just because we haven't had too much code yet, but I can stick those in there. That'd be helpful. Okay. Exercise 5. This is our last exercise for today. And this is where we really start to come full circle here. We start to do like what we're actually going to be doing. I mean, we just did it like close, but this is even getting even closer. And this one, I'm going to let you do yourself. Feel free to modify the example we just went through to sort of get here, or you can start from scratch, sort of whatever approach you'd like. I'm going to give you like 5 minutes to work on it or so. You might not be able to finish it, but so what you need to do is you need to make a GET request. So the careers and code.xyz server's number list endpoint. So this is an endpoint. It is going to return to you JSON. And the JSON you're going to get back is an array of numbers. So it's just like, that's it. There's no objects involved, like array of numbers. What I want you to do is I want you to print out that array of numbers. I'll start there. So I'll give you a few minutes to give that a shot. You should largely be able to copy what we just did or modify what we just did. It should be pretty straightforward, I think. Okay, so if you want more time, let me know, but I'm guessing this is probably pretty straightforward. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to update from that to number list. I'm also just going to get rid of the parse.numbers thing down here because it doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to save it. Come back over here. You're going to see that now, so our request, we're making it to the server. It's giving us back this big JSON array of numbers. And then here, that is being parsed with JSON.parse. It's giving us this parsed list of numbers. And now we've got this big list of numbers here. Okay, cool. That's 5A. Okay, 5B. For this one, I want you to add on to what you've done here. I want you to take your list of numbers and I want you to total them all up. So in here, we've got like 7,529, 5,824, 78, like all these numbers here. I want you to write some JavaScript code that takes these numbers, adds them all up, and prints out the total of all the numbers to the JavaScript console. So as a hint, probably going to be a loop involved, but give it a shot. Give you a few minutes.
Sorry, can we put the back in the Zoom window, the what we're supposed to do?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, folks, how's it going? Anyone able to get a total of all those numbers printed out? Okay. Well, Goggins said nope. Losh is close. Do you all want some more time, or do you just want to go through it? What do you think would be most helpful? Tara says go through it. Any other votes for go through it? Okay. Rather go through it. Okay, let's go through it. So if you have an array of numbers, this, to be clear, this exercise is more JavaScript than like network stuff. So if you have an array of numbers and you want to add them up, there's a few different ways you can approach doing that. Probably the way, though, that you've talked through with Max involves a loop. So if you can run code for every number in your array, you can do something like, probably the easiest way to wrap your head around is something like, what if you made a variable called like total? And then you had a loop, and that loop ran for every array item. And you did something like you took that total and you incremented it by the value of the item in the array, or something like that. You did something kind of like that at the very end, after you looped through for every item in the array, you'd effectively have incremented that total by every item in it, and you'd have a value that would be reflective of the sum of all the items in the array. So let me actually write that out as some real code. Okay, so I have parsed here. First, in this case, is going to be my array of numbers. So I'm going to do something maybe like for const item of parsed. I'm going to just start by logging out each item. So if I do that, I'm going to get, so a log for each item. Okay, cool. I'm going to make a variable up here. I'm going to call it total. I'm going to give it a value of 0. And I'm going to print at the very end here my value total. So I'm going to go like total, something like that. Okay. So all I've done here, I've defined an empty variable. I've logged it out. So the very end total. Cool. Okay. So the last little bit I've got to do here is every time that my code runs in my loop, I want to increment total by item. So there's a couple of different ways you can do this, but probably the easiest way to wrap your head around, I think, is something like total equals total plus item. What this is going to do is it's going to take your value total, it's going to add item to it, and it's going to store that into total. So what that means is every time you loop around, you're going to have your previous total value, add item, put it in the total. Okay, next one, total item, previous total value, add item, put in the total, around and around and around and around and around. After you do something like that, you get something kind of like that, 92588. Did anyone by chance go through and try to add up all these numbers and see what they total to? See if that's correct? I'm pretty sure it's correct. Seems like about the right magnitude. So assuming that's correct, I'm just going to assume it is. Then this would be some code you could use to maybe like total your list. So I'm going to take this, copy it. Flash, you're very close. After length, you've got parentheses. Get rid of those parentheses. I think otherwise it'll work.
But doesn't the length has the parentheses, like you have to put them? That's
No, so length is a property. It's not a function. So if I have like a is equal to 1, 2, 3 or something, and I go a dot length, that's going to be 3. I go like this,
oh,
that's
okay.
not going to work.
All because of Palash.
Yeah. So let me take that code and I'll put it into Slack. Okay. So I am going to do one last thing here, and this is going to lead us into tomorrow. I know I'm over time, by the way. I'm sorry. With kind of missing Monday, it's made this whole timetable kind of difficult. So I'm sorry I've gone late a few days here, but I think at this point we're fully caught up. So I am going to, in my HTML, I'm going to stick a div. Let me give it an ID of total. And I'm going to go back down here and I'm going to do something like document.get element by ID total inner HTML equals total. Kind of like that. So all I'm doing here is instead of logging, or I guess in addition to logging out my value, I'm also going to add it into the page. So this should hopefully seem familiar. Like if this doesn't, let me know. But
Yeah, we did that already a couple times.
now I've got my total in the page. So if I close this and refresh this, like I have a little mini web application here. This is exciting. What I've done is I've made a request to an endpoint on a server. I've gotten back data. I've processed that data. I've like done stuff to it, and I'm showing the result to the user. Now, this is like, albeit a very basic web application, but that's like beside the point. We're starting to do all the right stuff here for something like a New York Times exercise. So tomorrow, the last bit that we haven't talked about is sort of like, how do you figure out where to make your request to get your data? Like how do you find these like API services? How do you find these services where you can make requests to them, get back some JSON data? And like, how do you figure out where to get that data to show people? But other than that, the example we've got right here, you could substitute this fetch for the proper place you need to go to get the New York Times data. And this is largely what you got to do. I mean, it's like you can make it a bit more abstract, and often people do, like they want to sort of format their data a bit nicer. Like imagine that instead of printing out the total, I also did something like I want to like print data in the loop so I could like print out all my numbers or something. Like you can sort of get more fancy with it. But in essence, what's going on here and what we're going to be doing sort of this weekend with the New York Times project, it's very similar, very much on the same track. So I'm going to put this into Slack just so we've got a copy of that to refer back to if needed. But that's where I want to leave things today. So tomorrow we're going to go through APIs. We're going to talk about how to read documentation, sort of where to go to find all that stuff. And you should be set up in a good place to be able to do your New York Times project, which is exciting. So that's all, folks. Hopefully that was helpful. And if you've got any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I think we're done for the day. Cool. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow. Bye.